Dear students, today's topic is one of the most fascinating and intellectually challenging questions in the CSS and PMS syllabus. The question before us is, was Arabia really uncivilized before Islam? Discuss. Before we begin, I would like you to reflect on a statement that many of us have heard since childhood. People often say, before Islam, Arabia was a land of complete darkness and barbarism. But let me ask you another question. If Arabia was entirely uncivilized, how did it produce one of the richest languages in human history? How did it become a center of international trade? How did it preserve complex genealogies over many generations? How did it produce poets whose verses are still admired today? And how did a society that supposedly possessed no civilization become, within a few decades, the cradle of one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known? These questions immediately tells us that the issue is more complex than it first appears. The purpose of today's lecture is not to glorify pre-Islamic Arabia, not to condemn it without qualification. Our purpose is to examine the historical evidence carefully and reach a balanced conclusion. This is exactly what the word discuss requires. A discussion does not demand a one-sided answer. It requires us to examine evidence from different perspectives before arriving at a reasoned judgment. What do we mean by civilization? Before deciding whether Arabia was civilized or uncivilized, we must first define civilization itself. Historians generally describe civilization as a developed pattern of human life characterized by organized social institutions, economic activity, political structures, cultural achievements, religious beliefs, language, literature, and shared values. Notice something important. Civilization does not necessarily mean moral perfection. Ancient Rome possessed magnificent architecture, yet it also practiced slavery. Ancient Greece produced great philosophers, yet women enjoyed limited political rights. Persia possessed an advanced bureaucracy, yet social inequality remained widespread. Therefore, civilization and morality are not identical concepts. A society may possess civilization while simultaneously suffering from serious ethical problems. This distinction is essential for answering today's question. So, the question is, why has Arabia been called uncivilized? Many historians have described pre Islamic Arabia in negative terms because of its numerous social and moral problems. Let's first examine the evidence supporting this view. Politically, Arabia lacked a unified state. Unlike Byzantine and Sasanian empires, the Arabian Peninsula possessed no central government. Every tribe functioned independently. Justice depended upon tribal power rather than impartial law. Without a central authority, disputes frequently escalated into prolonged conflicts. The famous War of Bassus lasting almost 40 years, and the War of Dahes and Ghabra originating from a dispute over a horse race, illustrate how tribal honor often outweighed human life. This political fragmentation created chronic instability. Religiously, Arabia had drifted far from the pure monotheism of Prophet Ibrahim al-Islam. Historic reports associate Amr bin Luhay with introducing widespread idol worship into the Hijaz. By the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, almost 360 idols surrounded Kaaba. The Arabs acknowledged Allah as the supreme creator but sought intermediaries through idols. The Quran recorded their claim, we only worship them so that they may bring us nearer to Allah. This demonstrates that religious corruption had become deeply rooted. Socially, inequality remained widespread. Women often lacked inheritance rights. Certain forms of marriage denied them autonomy. The practice of female infanticide, although not universal among all tribes, represented one of the darkest features of the period. Allah condemned this practice in Surah is by saying, when the girl buried alive is asked, for what sin was she killed? Economically, commercial success existed alongside ethical weaknesses. Usury, exploitation of debtors, dishonest trade, monopoly were common. Morally, drinking, gambling, revenge killing, and unrestricted tribal loyalty weakened social cohesion. Looking only at these realities, one might conclude that Arabia was indeed uncivilized. However, is that the complete picture? Certainly not. Now let's consider the other side of the discussion. If civilization includes language, culture, commerce, and social organization, then pre Islamic Arabia clearly possessed many civilizational features. Perhaps its greatest achievement was the Arabic language. Pre Islamic Arabs developed one of the most sophisticated oral literary traditions in history. Poetry was not merely entertainment, it functioned as history, journalism, political commentary, and public memory. The celebrated Muallakat demonstrate extraordinary linguistic refinement. Their sophisticated vocabulary, rhetoric beauty, and artistic excellence continue to be studied today. Could such literary excellence emerge from a completely uncivilized society? The answer is obviously no. Trade provides another important example. Although much of Arabia consisted of desert, Arab merchants successfully connected Yemen with Syria, Persia, East Africa, and beyond. The Quran itself refers to the regular commercial journeys of Quraysh by entailing a verse that the journeys of winter and summer. These caravan routes required organization, diplomacy, financial management, and commercial expertise. International trade itself is evidence of an organized economic civilization. Socially, the Arabs also possessed admirable qualities. Hospitality became legendary. The name of Hatim Tai remains synonymous with generosity throughout Arabic literature, and even today. Courage, loyalty, patience, and keeping one's word were highly valued. Strong family ties and tribal solidarity ensured social support in an otherwise harsh desert environment. Even politically, although Arabia lacked a centralized state, tribal administration was not entirely chaotic. Tribal chiefs often governed through consultation with elders. Decisions frequently reflected consensus rather than absolute dictatorship. Thus, a form of decentralized political organization already existed. Religiously, Arabia was more diverse than as people assume. Alongside idol worship lived Jewish tribes, Christian communities, and the Hanafa, sincere monotheists who rejected paganism and sought the original faith of Prophet Ibrahim al-Islam. This diversity demonstrates that Arabian religious life was complex rather than uniformly pagan. Students, another important question deserves attention. Why did Arabian civilization differ from those of Rome or Persia? The answer lies largely in geography. The Arabian Peninsula consisted primarily of deserts and scattered oases. Agriculture remained limited, permanent rivers were virtually absent. Large cities therefore developed less frequently than in the fertile valleys of Egypt or Mesopotamia. Consequently, political centralization proved difficult. Nomadic lifestyles became common. Tribal organization emerged as the most practical system of survival. This teaches us an important lesson. Civilization is always shaped by geography. One should not judge desert societies by the standards of river civilizations. Arabian civilization developed differently because its environment demanded different institutions. So the question is, did Islam reject Arabian civilization? This brings us to the perhaps the most important question of today's lecture. If Arabia was completely uncivilized, why did Islam preserve so many of its institutions? Think carefully. Islam retained the Arabic language. It preserved the Kaaba while purifying it from idols. It encouraged trade but prohibited exploitation. It strengthened hospitality. It affirms consultation through shura. It preserved family life while reforming marriage. It redirected courage toward justice. It transformed tribal solidarity into the universal brotherhood of the Ummah. This demonstrates that Islam did not abolish Arabian civilization, rather, it distinguished between what was beneficial and what was harmful. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, refined civilization instead of destroying it. Is one modern scholar aptly observed, Islam did not begin with a cultural vacuum, it began with cultural reform. That observation summarizes the historical reality remarkably well. So we should consider several historians who have emphasized this balanced understanding. Philip K. Hitti wrote, Islam was not merely a new religion, it was a social revolution. Notice that Hitti describes Islam as a revolution, not as the creation of civilization from nothing. Likewise, W. Montgomery Ward observed Muhammad transformed the fragmented tribes into a united community. The key word is transformed. Transformation implies that something already existed but required reform and redirection. Even Karen Armstrong argues that Islam provided Arabia with a comprehensive moral vision capable of unifying previously divided communities. These observations reinforce the conclusion that Islam elevated an existing civilization rather than replacing a complete vacuum. Now let's answer the question directly. Was Arabia uncivilized? If by civilization we mean magnificent empires like Rome or Persia, then Arabia certainly appears less developed. If by civilization we mean moral perfection, then pre Islamic Arabia clearly failed. But if civilization means an organized society possessing language, commerce, culture, customs, political institutions, collective identity, then Arabia unquestionably possessed civilization. Its real deficiency was not the absence of civilization, its deficiency was the absence of a universally ethical and spiritual framework. This distinction is essential. Pre Islamic Arabia possessed civilization. Islam provided that civilization with moral purpose, social justice, political unity, and spiritual direction. Thus, Islam did not erase Arabian civilization, it completed its moral evolution. Dear students, whenever this question appears in CSS or PMS examination, avoid extreme positions. Do not write that Arabia was completely uncivilized. Equally, do not ignore its serious political, religious, social, and moral shortcomings. Instead, present a balanced historical judgment. Acknowledge its achievements in language, trade, hospitality, tribal organization, and oral culture. Then explain that these strengths existed alongside political fragmentation, religious corruption, social inequality, economic exploitation, and moral decline. Finally, demonstrate how Islam preserved what was noble while reforming what was unjust. I would like to conclude today's lecture with this reflection. The civilization of pre Islamic Arabia was neither a model of perfection nor a wasteland devoid of culture. It was a society rich in language, commerce, courage, hospitality, and communal identity, yet burdened by tribal fragmentation, religious deviation, social injustice, and ethical inconsistency. The genius of Islam lay not in destroying this civilization, but in transforming it by replacing tribalism with the concept of ummah, idolatry with tawheed, exploitation with justice, custom with divine guidance. Islam elevated an existing civilization into a universal moral order. This balanced understanding is uh, not only reflects historical truth but also represents the analytical approach expected from a high-scoring CSS or PMS candidate. Thank you.